My wife slapped me in front of her boyfriend. 4 minutes later. Payback begins. What if everything you thought you knew was a lie? Imagine discovering that your spouse, the person you trusted the most, had been living a double life. In tonight's story, we'll dive into a shocking betrayal that leaves one man questioning everything he ever believed. How will he take control back? Stay tuned to find out how one devastating moment sets off a chain of events that no one saw coming. It was a night like any other, or at least that's what I told myself as I drove through the winding streets toward the mansion where Serafina's party was being held. My palms gripped the steering wheel a bit too tightly, as if I could somehow will away the knot of unease that had been gnawing at me for the past few weeks. My mind raced with thoughts, yet I tried to keep them in check. The house looked grand, a true testament to Serafina's taste for luxury. A part of me wanted to believe this life we'd built was perfect, untouchable. But another part, the part I tried to ignore, kept whispering that something wasn't right. Serafina, my wife of 7 years, had been acting strangely lately. Late nights, secretive phone calls, little lies here and there, all things I had dismissed at first. Love does that to you, it blinds you. Makes you question nothing, until the cracks start to show. A few weeks ago, I'd finally snapped out of my denial. I had hired a private investigator, the kind that digs deep into the corners where secrets hide, and the truth, bitter and sharp, came flooding in. I learned of Desmond. Desmond, the man who had been creeping into our lives unnoticed, weaving himself into our shared story. Desmond, who had not just stolen her affections, but had begun draining our finances little by little. It wasn't enough for him to claim her heart, he wanted more. He wanted it all. I'd spent those weeks in silence, watching, waiting. I was a man pushed to the edge but unwilling to act impulsively. Every time Serafina gave me one of those sweet smiles, the ones she thought masked everything, I saw the lies etched in her eyes. Every time she told me she was working late or out with friends, I knew she was slipping away to him. I didn't confront her right away. I needed proof, real proof. The investigators' reports were a godsend. They confirmed everything. Each transaction, every secret rendezvous, all of it. I had everything I needed, but I wasn't about to storm in, guns blazing. No, I would play this carefully. Tonight, I was going to get the final piece, the last moment where I could expose her. And I would do it in front of the people who had laughed at me, mocked me, turned a blind eye to the woman they all thought was perfect. They were about to witness her unravel, and I would be the one to tear the mask off. I wasn't here to make a scene, I was here to watch her world collapse. I stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house. The lights gleamed from every window, a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside me. This wasn't just any betrayal. This was something deeper, something more sinister. She thought she could play this double life without consequences, that she could have him, have everything, without losing me. But tonight, I was going to teach her a lesson about respect, about loyalty, and about the consequences of thinking you can lie without getting caught. I entered the house with a calm I didn't feel. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline rushing through my veins. Serafina was standing in the living room, surrounded by friends, laughing with Desmond. They were so casual, so comfortable, as if they were in their own world. She was sitting next to him on the couch, her hand casually resting on his thigh, like I didn't even exist. I felt my blood run cold, but I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I scanned the room, my eyes landing on her friends, their fake smiles, their false concern. They had all been complicit in this, their laughter had only fed her ego. Their silence had allowed this to continue. I barely opened my mouth to speak when Serafina stood up, her eyes flashing with righteous indignation. The room went silent for a split second, just enough time for her to spit out the words that felt like venom. "What are you doing here?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "You don't belong here." The laughter from her friends erupted, the sound sharp and cutting. I locked eyes with Desmond, and for a moment, I saw the smug satisfaction in his gaze. He smirked, leaning back in his seat as if I were nothing but an annoyance, an obstacle in their perfect little world. I didn't flinch. I didn't let the anger show. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my watch, glancing at the time. I had 4 minutes. 4 minutes before the truth came crashing down. The room was waiting for me to lash out, to make a scene, but I wasn't going to give them that. No, I had something far better planned. Serafina's voice cut through the room again. "You're pathetic," she said, her voice rising above the laughter, trying to humiliate me further. No wonder I had to find someone else. "Look at you, standing there like a lost puppy. Do you even have anything to say for yourself?" I did. But not yet. Instead, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I let the laughter die down around me, the mocking tone slowly fading into murmurs. They were waiting for me to explode, to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But I wasn't going to give them that. I was going to play this out. I took a step forward and met Serafina's gaze, really looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt nothing. No anger. No love. Just a strange, hollow detachment. "Enjoy this moment," I said calmly, my voice steady and cold, "because it's the last one you'll have." The room fell silent for a brief second, the shock of my words hanging in the air. But just as quickly, Desmond's laughter filled the room again, as if my words meant nothing. "Look at that, Lil," he said, leaning back in his chair. "He's making threats now. Real tough guy." I checked my watch again. 3 minutes. I smiled. Just a small, knowing curve of my lips. I was in control now. I didn't need to explain myself. They wouldn't listen. They were too far gone in their own arrogance to hear the truth. The room around me felt like a theater, and I was waiting for the curtain to drop. The laughter was no longer the sharp, biting sound it had been when I first walked in. It had softened, grown uneasy, uncertain. I was watching them squirm, and I hadn't even said anything yet. "Do you really think you're untouchable?" I thought to myself, watching Desmond shift uncomfortably in his seat. I could see it now, his facade was cracking. And Serafina, she couldn't even hide the anxiety creeping into her eyes. She wasn't as in control as she thought. Neither of them were. The countdown was ticking, and I was ready to watch it all burn. The seconds seemed to stretch as I stood there, watching them. Serafina, her expression a mixture of confusion and defiance, stared at me as if she couldn't fathom what was happening. Desmond, always the picture of smug satisfaction, continued to lounge in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. The laughter around the room, once mocking and loud, had become hesitant, unsure. They didn't know what I knew, and that was my advantage. My eyes flicked from face to face, seeing the shift in their demeanor. The air had changed, it was thicker now, charged with tension. The arrogance in the room, that sense of invincibility they carried, was starting to crack, and I could feel the power shifting in my favor. I wasn't going to let the next few moments slip away, not after everything I had endured. The sting of betrayal had eaten at me for weeks, gnawing away at my soul. But tonight, I was no longer the man who had been blindsided by a lie. Tonight, I was in control. The look on Serafina's face, her confusion mixed with a hint of fear, was all I needed. She thought she could toy with me, like I was some fool who wouldn't notice. But she was wrong. I had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when everything would fall apart. And that moment was now. "Why are you here?" Serafina asked again, her voice sharp, but it lacked the usual confidence. It was almost as if she was trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was slipping away from her. I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I allowed her question to hang in the air, thick with anticipation. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, and I knew they were waiting for me to crack. They wanted me to break. They wanted to see the man they had humiliated crumple. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. No, I was the one who would have the last word. I glanced at my watch again. 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes left. Serafina's friends were shifting in their seats, their earlier bravado gone. They were starting to realize that something wasn't quite right. I could see the subtle signs, uneasy glances exchanged, fidgeting hands, and the way they were trying to look anywhere but at me. Desmond, who had been so sure of himself just moments ago, was starting to look uncomfortable too. I could feel his eyes flicking between me and Serafina, his expression faltering. It was as if he was beginning to understand that he wasn't as untouchable as he had thought. "Are you going to just stand there, or are you going to explain yourself?" Serafina demanded, her voice rising, but there was a tremor to it now. She was losing her grip, and it was becoming increasingly clear. She didn't know how to handle me anymore. I could hear the underlying panic creeping into her words. The same panic I had felt all those times she lied to me, pretending everything was fine when I knew the truth. The woman who once controlled every room she walked into, now seemed small, desperate, and unprepared for what was coming. I took a step forward, but still, I said nothing. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. They had all been so quick to judge, to mock, to assume I was just a man who didn't see the cracks in his own life. Well, now I was the one who had the last laugh. I wasn't here to scream or shout. I was here to expose them, to show them just how far they had fallen, and how little power they actually had. Desmond was the first to speak up, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's the matter, champ? Cat got your tongue?" He leaned back in his chair, his hands behind his head, trying to appear relaxed, but I saw the unease in his eyes. I had his number now, and he knew it. I looked at him, meeting his gaze with a calmness that must have unnerved him. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" I said, my voice even, but heavy with meaning. Desmond scoffed, shaking his head. "This is pathetic. You've come here to ruin everything, huh? You're a joke." Serafina shot him a look, as if trying to silence him, but the damage was already done. The cracks were visible now. Desmond's cool exterior was starting to crumble. He might have thought he could waltz in and take over my life, take everything I had, but now he was realizing just how wrong he was. Serafina was still glaring at me, her eyes filled with that mix of disdain and disbelief, but I could see something else there now, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. She was afraid. The woman who once stood tall and strong was now just another person in a room that had turned against her. "You don't have the guts to confront me, do you?" She spat, her voice trembling with frustration. "You're just standing there like a coward, doing nothing. Do you think I'm going to care about your little threats?" I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let it show. No, I had spent too long keeping myself in check. She was trying to provoke me, to make me act out, but I wasn't going to fall into that trap. I had planned this for too long to let it slip away over a petty outburst. Instead, I let the silence stretch out between us. The room was suffocating now, every single person in it waiting for me to respond. They were watching me closely, trying to read my next move. They thought I was broken, thought I was lost. They were wrong. The moment had come, and I was ready to unleash everything I had been holding back. "Enjoy this moment," I said, my voice cold, almost flat, "because it's the last one you'll have." For a brief second, there was nothing but stunned silence. I saw Serafina's eyes flicker with confusion, then panic, but it was too late for her to regain control. I wasn't the man she had fooled for so long anymore. I wasn't the weak, trusting husband. I had become something else, something she couldn't predict. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice cracking with frustration. "You're just making threats. This is pathetic. You have nothing." I smiled. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of satisfaction. The room was still, and for the first time since I walked in, they were all on edge, waiting for something they couldn't understand. I glanced at my watch again. 1 minute left. I felt their eyes on me, but I was beyond them now. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I was the one who had control. Desmond's smirk faltered, and I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Serafina's friends, who had been so eager to mock me earlier, were now looking at each other, unsure of what was happening. They could sense the shift, the power dynamic turning against them, and they didn't know how to handle it. "Time's up," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The room went completely still, and in that moment, I knew they could feel it, the shift in the air. The weight of what was coming. I wasn't going to scream, wasn't going to fight. I was going to show them the truth. "Let me make this simple," I continued, taking a slow step forward. "Everything you've done, every lie, every betrayal, it's about to come crashing down. You wanted to pretend you could live this perfect life, that your little games wouldn't have consequences. But guess what? They did, and now you're going to face them." Desmond opened his mouth to retort, but he couldn't find the words. He knew that this was the moment. This wasn't just about a man standing up for himself. This was about a reckoning, about showing them that their actions had consequences. And the best part? They weren't going to see it coming. I turned to Serafina, my eyes locking onto hers. The arrogance in her gaze was gone. Now there was only fear. She could feel it too. The truth was about to come out, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You think you're untouchable?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "We'll see about that. Hold on, just when you think the story couldn't get worse, it does." With the truth finally out, what happens next is nothing short of mind-blowing. Will the man get the ultimate revenge? Or is there an even bigger twist in store? What would you do in his shoes? Comment 1 if you think revenge is the only option. Comment 2 if you believe justice will prevail. I can't wait to see your thoughts. The room was still as a breathless silence settled in, hanging thick in the air. I could feel their eyes on me. Serafina's, Desmond's, the friends who had once been so eager to witness my downfall. But now, there was something else in their gazes. Something like realization, but laced with confusion, as they all tried to figure out why I hadn't reacted the way they expected. They wanted me to scream, to beg, to fight. They wanted to see me crack, but I wasn't about to give them that. I wasn't the same man I had been just a few months ago. The man who blindly trusted, who allowed himself to be humiliated without a second thought. No. Tonight I was someone else entirely, someone who had been planning for this moment, waiting for the right time to strike. And it was time. It was time for everything to change. Serafina shifted uneasily on the couch, her earlier bravado now replaced by something darker, something closer to fear. Her fingers, which had once played so casually with Desmond's, were now twitching, betraying her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I watched her closely, savoring the moment, knowing she was struggling to hold on to whatever facade she had left. I had waited for this for weeks, gathering the pieces of her lies, each one falling into place like a puzzle that finally made sense. I had seen the signs, the late nights, the stolen moments, the casual lies. At first, I had tried to convince myself it was just my paranoia, but deep down, I knew the truth. And now, as I stood there, watching her, I realized how much she had underestimated me. How much she had thought she could get away with. Desmond, ever the smug opportunist, leaned forward, his posture defensive now. His eyes flicked nervously between me and Serafina, as though he could feel the tension in the room but didn't know how to break it. I could see the cracks in his armor. A man who had once walked into this room, like he owned it now, looked like a cornered animal, unsure of where to turn. He tried to maintain that arrogant smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, once so full of confidence, were now filled with doubt. He had thought he was invincible, that I would be the one left in ruins while he and Serafina waltzed away with everything. But it was the other way around now. He could feel it, too. The ground beneath him was shifting, and he had no idea what was coming next. I could almost hear his mind racing as he opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. He was trying to regain control, to steer the situation back in his favor. But it was too late for that. I had already taken control. "What do you want, Michael?" he asked, his voice tight, almost desperate. He was trying to keep his cool, but there was a tremor there, one that betrayed everything he was feeling. "You want to fight? You want to make this some kind of big spectacle? Go ahead. You'll just make a fool of yourself." I stepped closer, my voice calm and measured. "I don't need to fight," I said softly, letting the words hang in the air between us. "You've already lost. Both of you. And I'm just here to watch it all fall apart." Serafina shot me a venomous look, but I didn't flinch. I was beyond her petty threats now. "You think you've won?" She spat, her voice growing louder, the anger rising in her chest. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything we've worked for? You're pathetic." I smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips. There it was, the last bit of arrogance from her. The last vestige of control she thought she had. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It wasn't even just about the money she had stolen. No, it was something deeper, something far more satisfying. This was about power. About showing both of them that their lies had consequences, that their little world of deceit had a price. Desmond tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand, silencing him. I wasn't going to let him talk me down, not now. "You think this is just about us, about me and you, Serafina?" I said, my tone cool, controlled. "This is bigger than that. This is about everything you've taken. Everything you thought you could steal without consequence. You thought you could just keep lying, keep running around behind my back, and there wouldn't be any fallout. But there is. I could see the realization dawning on her. She was starting to understand that I wasn't bluffing, that I wasn't going to back down. And the fear in her eyes, that was the moment I had been waiting for. She had thought she could play me. She had thought she could get away with it all. But I had been planning this for so long. I had set the trap so carefully that now, as I stood there, watching her unravel, I felt something like satisfaction, a quiet, cold satisfaction that made everything worth it. For a split second, the room felt even more suffocating. The laughter that had once filled the air now seemed distant, replaced by a tense silence that hung over us like a thick fog. Serafina was still trying to hold on to her composure, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Desmond was shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers twitching at his sides, unsure of what to do next. They had no idea what was coming, and that only made it sweeter. "You're pathetic," Serafina muttered under her breath, her voice barely above a whisper. But I could hear it, and I didn't let it slide. I stepped forward again, closing the distance between us. "Is that really what you think of me?" I asked, my voice low, but carrying that sharp edge I knew would get under her skin. "You think you can just insult me, humiliate me, and walk away without a second thought? You're the one who's pathetic, Serafina." Desmond stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice rising in anger, but there was panic beneath it. "You're not going to do this, Michael. You're not going to ruin everything just because you can't take the truth." I looked at him, my gaze steady. "The truth?" I repeated, my voice hard. "You don't get to talk about truth, Desmond. You've been lying and stealing from me for months. And now you're going to pay for it." Desmond opened his mouth to retort, but no words came. The silence was almost deafening now. Everyone in the room could feel it. The power had shifted. And as I stood there, the reality of it settled in. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was the moment when everything they had worked for would come crumbling down. They had thought they were invincible, that no one would ever catch them, that they could get away with it all. But the truth was, they had underestimated me. And that, I realized, was the greatest mistake they had ever made. "You can't fix this," I said, my voice steady and cold. "This isn't something you can walk away from. You had your chance. And now, you'll see what happens when you cross me." Serafina's face twisted in anger, but I saw something else there too, something like regret. Or maybe fear. She could feel it now. The walls closing in. The inevitable collapse of everything she had built on lies. And as I turned to walk out, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They had played their game, but in the end, I had won. The tension in the room was palpable now. It had been building slowly, like a storm cloud on the horizon, and now it was ready to burst. Serafina's earlier bravado had crumbled, and the smirk Desmond wore like a shield had faded into something more akin to nervousness. They could both feel that something was shifting, something they hadn't anticipated. They thought they had won, that they had outsmarted me, but now they were standing at the edge of their own downfall. I was the calm in the chaos, the one who had waited for this moment, and now that it was here, I wasn't going to waste it. The clock was ticking down, and there was no more time for games. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch, drawing it out, watching them squirm. Serafina's hands were fidgeting in her lap now, her earlier posture so casual, so confident gone. Her body language was betraying her, the mask was slipping. She was trying to maintain her composure, but I could see the cracks. Desmond, who had been sitting so smugly just moments ago, now had his eyes darting nervously around the room. It was clear he was trying to control the situation, trying to pull something from his bag of tricks to regain control. But what he didn't realize was that the power was no longer in his hands. It was mine. Desmond leaned forward, trying to make himself look imposing, but his voice was tight, and there was no real bite behind it. "What's your plan here, Michael?" he asked, trying to sound confident, but I could hear the crack in his tone. "You think you're going to scare us? You think you're going to make us feel bad? What? You really think you're going to ruin everything, just because you got your feelings hurt?" I looked at him, my gaze calm, steady. It wasn't the reaction he expected, and it made him uncomfortable. I could see it in the way he shifted his weight, in the way he tried to mask his insecurity with bravado. But it wasn't working anymore. I wasn't here to make threats. and I wasn't here to play games. The truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. Serafina had thought she could juggle both me and Desmond, that she could lie and manipulate. But now, the walls were closing in, and there was nowhere to hide. "You've already lost," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You just don't know it yet." Serafina stiffened at my words, but she didn't respond immediately. She was too busy trying to gather her thoughts, too busy scrambling to regain the control she had lost. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but it was too late for second chances. She had burned every bridge, destroyed every ounce of trust, and now she was standing in the wreckage, unable to put the pieces back together. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was nothing more than a stranger to me now. And the more I looked at her, the clearer that became. Desmond, on the other hand, was growing more desperate by the second. He couldn't handle the uncertainty. He wasn't used to being the one on the receiving end of this kind of pressure. I watched him for a moment longer, letting his discomfort settle in before I spoke again, my voice low but piercing. "You think I'm just going to sit here and let you walk all over me?" I said, and this time, I let the anger seep into my voice. "You think I'm going to let you walk away from this unscathed, like everything you did meant nothing? Like I didn't know?" Serafina's face flushed, her lips pressing together, as she tried to maintain her composure. But there was nothing she could do to stop the tide that was rising. She had pushed me too far, and now I was taking control. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about showing them that their actions had consequences, that they couldn't just ruin someone's life without paying the price. I had spent weeks setting this up carefully, methodically, and now it was time for them to face what they had done. "You don't even know what's coming, do you?" I asked, leaning in just a little closer, making sure they both heard the weight in my words. "I've already seen everything, every little lie, every penny you've stolen, every promise you broke. And I've been waiting, biding my time, until the right moment." Desmond's face paled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. It was subtle, a flicker, but it was there. He had thought he could escape this, that he could slip away unnoticed. But now the truth was catching up to him, and there was nowhere to run. "You think you're invincible, don't you?" I continued, my voice cutting through the tension. "You thought you could take everything from me, steal my money, my trust, my life, and just walk away like nothing happened. Well, newsflash, Desmond, you're not untouchable. Neither of you are." Serafina looked like she might say something, but the words caught in her throat. She knew, just like Desmond did, that there was nothing they could say that would change what was happening. They had underestimated me, thought I was weak, thought I would just roll over and accept their betrayal. But they were wrong. "You want to see the proof?" I asked, my voice darkening with the weight of everything that had happened. "I'll show you exactly what you've done. I'll show you every receipt, every transfer, every lie you've told. You think you've gotten away with it, but I've been watching. I've been collecting every piece of evidence, and now you're going to face the music." Desmond opened his mouth to respond, but this time, there was nothing he could say. His smirk had disappeared entirely, replaced by a look of panic. It wasn't the way he had planned for this night to go. He had come here thinking he could bask in his victory, but now, the tables had turned, the power had shifted, and he was on the losing side. He wasn't a victor anymore, he was a man caught in his own lies. Serafina's eyes flicked toward the door, like she was thinking of making a run for it. But she knew there was no escaping. The walls were closing in, and no amount of manipulation could save her now. She had thought she could control everything, keep the truth hidden. But the truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how deeply it was buried. "You should have thought about this before," I said, my voice cool, almost detached. "Before you thought you could lie and steal without consequences. Before you thought you could play with people's lives like they were nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They both knew it was over. They had no more tricks up their sleeves. No more lies to tell. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had done what I set out to do. I had exposed them for what they were, and now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. Desmond's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but there was none. I wasn't going to let them walk away. Not this time. Not after everything they had taken from me. They had thought they could control me, but in the end, it was me who controlled this moment. And now, it was time for them to pay. The moment hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick with anticipation and dread. Every second felt like an eternity. The walls of the room seemed to close in around us as I stood there, unyielding, watching Serafina and Desmond squirm under the weight of their own guilt. I could see it now, the panic flickering in Serafina's eyes. The way she shifted in her seat, trying to find some semblance of control. Desmond, ever the opportunist, was no longer the confident man who had entered the room with so much swagger. His shoulders were tense, his gaze darting around, looking for any way out. He was trapped, just like her, and they both knew it. Serafina cleared her throat, attempting to steady herself, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "You don't have anything," she said. Her words coming out sharp and defensive, but there was a quiver beneath them. A crack in the armor she had worn for so long. "You think you can just come here and ruin everything? What do you even want from me, Michael? This is ridiculous." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence settle around us, the tension building with every passing second. They thought I was bluffing, that I was just a man consumed by emotion, desperate to cling to something that had already slipped through my fingers. But they were wrong. I was done with the games, done with pretending that I didn't see the lies. I had been planning this for far too long to let it slip away now. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. "You really think I don't know, don't you?" I asked. Finally, my voice calm, almost too calm, but heavy with meaning. "You think I didn't notice the late nights, the unexplained absences, the constant excuses? You thought I was just going to sit back and let you tear everything apart?" I let the words hang in the air, the gravity of them sinking into the room. "No. I wasn't blind, Serafina. I saw it all. And now, you're going to pay for it." Desmond's eyes flicked toward Serafina, as if searching for her to take control, to turn this back in their favor. But she was just as lost as he was. He knew it too. His posture slouched. The false confidence he had been hiding behind crumbling under the weight of my words. "You're crazy," he muttered, shaking his head as though trying to dismiss the reality that was closing in on him. This is all just some sick joke. You can't just expose us and expect it to end well for you." I stood my ground, my gaze unwavering. "You're wrong, Desmond. This isn't a joke," I said, the coldness in my tone now palpable. "This is the price you pay when you think you can take everything from someone without consequences." I could see the anger rising in him, the frustration, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. I had been here before, but this time, it was different. I wasn't the one on the receiving end of the betrayal anymore. No, now I was the one in control. And it felt damn good. Serafina, still trying to hold on to whatever shred of dignity she had left, stood up abruptly, her movements sharp and defensive. "Enough, Michael," she snapped, her voice louder now, her eyes flashing with anger. "You don't get to come in here and ruin my life. I did what I had to do. You think I didn't suffer? You think I didn't try to make it work with you? But you," she broke off, her words faltering as she searched for the right ones to make me feel the weight of her justification. But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I had spent too long listening to her excuses, her manipulation, the lies. She had worn me down with her sweet words, her promises that things would change. But they never did. It was all an act. And now I was seeing her for who she really was. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, had been nothing more than a master of deception, playing me for a fool while she was out there living her double life with Desmond. "You don't get to stand there and justify this to me," I said, my voice rising with the raw emotion that had been simmering beneath the surface. "I've seen the receipts, Serafina. I've seen the hotel rooms you booked, the dinners you shared, the lies you told me every damn day. You think I didn't notice the way Desmond looked at you? The way you both acted like I wasn't even in the room? You didn't care about me. You never did. You only cared about what you could take." Desmond shifted uneasily, his face pale now, his arrogance completely gone. I could see the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't just the fear of getting caught. It was the fear of losing everything. He had thought he could just waltz into my life and steal my wife, my trust, and my money, without facing any real consequences. But now, everything he had built, every lie he had told, was coming crashing down around him. and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Please," Serafina said, her voice breaking as the reality of the situation hit her. "You don't understand. I was just trying to be happy. I didn't mean to hurt you." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You don't get it, do you, Serafina?" I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "This isn't about you trying to be happy. This is about you thinking you could destroy everything without a care. It's about the lies, the betrayal, the way you thought I wouldn't find out. You don't get to play the victim now. You've made your bed, and now you're going to lie in it." Desmond looked like he might say something, but the words didn't come. He was cornered. He was out of moves. The game was over. "You thought you could walk away from this unscathed," I continued, my tone cold, my eyes never leaving their faces. "But you're wrong. No one gets to do that. Not after everything you've done. And now, you're going to face the consequences. You're going to face me, and when this is all over, you'll have no one left to blame but yourselves." The room fell into an almost unbearable silence, as I let the weight of my words sink in. Serafina was shaking her head, trying to find some way to explain herself. But there was nothing left to say. Desmond was sitting there, his posture hunched, defeated. He couldn't argue. He couldn't deny the truth anymore. They were trapped in their own lies, and it was over. I had won. And now, there was no turning back. The room had become suffocating. The air, thick with tension, clung to me like a second skin. Serafina and Desmond were now both on the edge, standing at the precipice of their own destruction. I had done everything I needed to do to bring this moment to life. And now it was time to finish it. The lies had festered for so long, and I could feel the weight of them pressing in, suffocating everyone in the room. They had underestimated me, thought I was just another man they could toy with, another fool to be deceived. But I wasn't. I never was. Serafina's eyes were no longer filled with the icy defiance that had defined her for so long. No, now they were full of something else: fear. She couldn't hide it anymore, not from me, not from anyone. It was there, behind the mask she had carefully crafted, and it was breaking through in the tremor of her hands and the panic in her voice. "Michael, please, stop. Just, stop this. I never meant for it to get this far. You have to believe me." She was pleading now. The woman who had once been so certain of herself, so confident in her ability to control everything, was falling apart at the seams. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. The moment when she would realize that her world was crumbling. The moment when she would see just how deep her betrayal had cut. She had thought she could keep playing this game, keep pretending everything was fine. But she had been wrong. So wrong. "You never meant for it to get this far," I repeated, my voice low, dripping with disbelief. "That's what you're going to say to me now? After everything you've done? After the lies, the manipulation, the way you destroyed me, piece by piece?" I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface, but I kept it contained. I wasn't here to make a scene. I wasn't here to scream at her. No, I had something better in mind. The silence, the quiet tension between us, was the perfect weapon. It was far more powerful than any outburst could ever be. Serafina took a step toward me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for some sign of forgiveness, some flicker of hope that I would let her walk away unscathed. But I wasn't going to give her that. Not anymore. She had taken everything from me: my trust, my love, my sense of security, and now she was going to face the consequences. Desmond, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of fear and arrogance, finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "You don't get to do this, Michael. This isn't you. You're just bitter. You're angry, and that's fine. But don't make a spectacle of this. Don't ruin everything just because you can't handle the truth." I turned my gaze toward him, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Desmond was a man who had always believed he could control everything. He had always thought he could take what he wanted without facing the repercussions. But now he was realizing that everything he had done, every lie, every secret rendezvous with Serafina, was coming back to haunt him. He could see it in my eyes, the cold fury burning behind them, and it was making him nervous. It was making him afraid. "Ruining everything?" I asked, my voice a quiet growl. "You think I'm the one ruining everything? You've already ruined everything, Desmond. You've taken what was mine, and you think you can just walk away without a scratch? That's not how this works. You don't get to do that. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. He couldn't. He was out of excuses, out of justifications. All he had left was fear, and I could see it in the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes flicked between Serafina and me, looking for a way out, but finding none. It was over for him. It was over for both of them. Do you know what I've been through? I asked, my voice still calm, still measured, but every word laced with the weight of the past few months. Do you know how many nights I've spent wondering where you were? How many times I had to convince myself that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't? I trusted you, Serafina. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away for him. You think I'm angry? You think I'm bitter? You're damn right I am. But what I am more than anything else is done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done with you. Serafina's face was pale now, her lips trembling, her body shaking as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. She couldn't fix this. She couldn't undo the damage she had done, and I wasn't going to let her try. You're the one who ruined this, Serafina, the first said, my voice quieter now, but no less forceful. You're the one who thought you could destroy everything without consequences. Well, here they are. The room was dead silent now. The only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning in the background. I could see Desmond's jaw clenching, the muscles in his neck tight with frustration. He was desperate now, but there was nothing left to do. His arrogance had led him to this point, and now he was trapped in the web he had helped weave. Serafina took a step back, her eyes wide as she realized the truth of what I was saying. She had tried to manipulate me, tried to make me believe that everything was her fault, that she was the one who had been wronged, but now it was clear she had known what she was doing every step of the way. She had thought she could live two lives, one with me and one with Desmond, without anyone finding out. She thought she could keep lying and I wouldn't see through it. But I had seen it. I had seen it all, and now she was paying for it. I never wanted it to go this far, Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible, but the guilt in her eyes was unmistakable. No, I said softly, shaking my head. You didn't. But you did. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. There was no laughter, no mockery, no arrogance. Just silence. The weight of the situation had hit everyone in the room, and I knew they could feel it. The shift in power was palpable now. The tables turned in a way none of them had expected. Serafina was no longer the woman who had controlled every room she walked into. Desmond was no longer the man who had thought he could get away with anything. They were both on their knees now, figuratively if not literally, and I was the one holding all the cards. I've made my peace, I said, my voice steady now. And you need to make yours. This is where your story ends, Serafina. This is where the truth comes out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You wanted to play with fire? Well, now you're getting burned. Serafina's face crumpled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because she had finally seen the truth. She had finally seen that I wasn't the man she could walk all over anymore, and that, in itself, was the sweetest victory. The silence in the room felt suffocating, oppressive like the calm before the storm. I stood there, unwavering, while Serafina and Desmond exchanged looks of confusion and rising panic. The power I had taken from them was now mine, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on them, suffocating their ability to think clearly. They had thought they were in control, thought they had the upper hand, but now, the tables had turned, and they were powerless. They had underestimated me, thought they could deceive me, break me, and walk away unscathed. But here they were, cornered, with no way out. And I was savoring every second of it. Desmond shifted in his seat, his movements jerky, like a man desperate to find a way to regain control. But I could see it now, he was unraveling. The smug, arrogant man who had once paraded around like he owned the world, was shrinking before my eyes. The walls he had built around himself, the facade of invincibility, were crumbling, piece by piece. I could hear his shallow breaths, feel the panic beginning to seep through the cracks in his bravado. And Serafina was no better. She stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape that wasn't there. The woman who had once held all the power in our relationship was now a shadow of herself. A broken, desperate shell, trying to hold on to something that was slipping through her fingers. "Michael, you have to stop this," Serafina said, her voice trembling, the facade of control slipping further with every word. "Please, we can fix this. We can make things right. I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake, but you don't have to do this." I looked at her, my gaze unwavering, cold. "You think an apology is going to fix this? After everything you've done? After everything you've taken from me?" My words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. "You don't get to undo the damage you've caused with a few words. This isn't about fixing things, Serafina. It's about facing the truth. And you," I pointed at Desmond, "you're just as guilty." Desmond opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but no words came. He was silenced, trapped by the weight of his own guilt. The mask of arrogance he had worn so comfortably for so long had finally cracked, and beneath it was nothing but fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing everything he had worked so hard to take from me. His face was pale now, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room, desperate for an out. But there was no escape. Not now. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. The tension in the room ratcheted up, the air thick with anticipation. "You thought you could get away with this, didn't you? Thought you could just slip away, keep playing your games, and I wouldn't notice." But I did notice, Desmond. I saw everything. The lies, the stolen moments, the way you thought you could just take what wasn't yours. "Well, now you're going to pay for it." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. He knew, as well as I did, that the jig was up. This wasn't some petty argument anymore. This was the end of the road. The truth had come crashing down, and there was no hiding from it. "I didn't think you would actually find out," Desmond said, his voice barely a whisper, cracking with uncertainty. "I thought you were. I thought you were too blind to see." I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You thought wrong." Serafina stepped forward, her face flushed with a mix of shame and frustration. "You don't have to do this, Michael," she said, her voice pleading now. "Please, just let it go. We can start over. I never meant for things to go this far." I shook my head slowly, my expression hardening. "It's too late for that. You've made your choices, Serafina. You've burned every bridge you had with me, and now you're going to face the consequences. You don't get to take everything and then just walk away. It doesn't work that way." Desmond looked at me, a spark of defiance flickering in his eyes. But it was weak, fragile, like a man trying to hold on to something that was slipping through his fingers. "This is just about revenge, isn't it?" He spat, his voice shaking. "You're just mad because we beat you at your own game. You think you can hurt us, but you're just making a fool of yourself." I took another step forward, my voice low, my words deliberate. "Revenge?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "This isn't about revenge, Desmond. This is about justice. This is about showing you both that actions have consequences. You can't just walk around, lying, cheating, stealing, and expect there to be no fallout. You thought you were invincible. But guess what? You're not. And now, you're going to face the truth." The words hung in the air, thick with finality. I could feel the room shift beneath us, the tension building to a boiling point. Serafina's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her, as the reality of the situation sunk in. She knew, deep down, that there was no escaping this. The web of lies she had so carefully woven had unraveled, and now she was standing in the wreckage. There was no way to put it back together. Desmond's face twisted in frustration, but he knew it too. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the sense that everything was slipping away from him. He had been the king of this twisted little world, playing both sides, taking what he wanted without a care for the damage it caused. But now, he was nothing. A man on the edge of losing everything. And he could do nothing but watch as it all came crashing down around him. Serafina looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Please, Michael," she begged, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just trying to be happy." I stared at her, unmoved. "Happiness? You think you deserve happiness after everything you've done? After everything you've taken from me?" My words were steady, cold, as if the anger had long since left me. There was nothing left but this moment, this reckoning. No, Serafina. You don't get to play the victim anymore. The silence was deafening now. They were both standing at the edge, and I was the one holding all the power. It wasn't about anger anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure they understood the cost of their actions. And I was going to make sure they did. You've taken everything from me, I said, my voice steady, unyielding. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. I could see Desmond and Serafina struggling to find something to say, some way to talk their way out of it. But there was nothing left. The truth had already been laid bare, and there was no escaping it. The game was over. The room felt suffocating, the silence pressing down on all of us like a thick, impenetrable wall. Serafina and Desmond stood frozen, like two trapped animals caught in their own lies, struggling to breathe, to find any way to escape the inevitable. But there was no escaping what was coming. There was no way to outrun the truth I had spent so long preparing for this moment. They had thought they could control the narrative, thought they could write their own story. But I had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the perfect moment to tear everything they built apart. And now, the moment had arrived. Serafina, once the embodiment of confidence, now looked like a ghost of the woman she had been. Her eyes darted around the room, her mind racing for an explanation, a way to claw her way out of the mess she had created. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to stand tall, to tell me that I was wrong, that this wasn't her fault, that she hadn't really done anything that terrible. But we both knew the truth now, and the weight of it hung between us like a heavy, suffocating fog. She couldn't hide from it anymore. Desmond, ever the opportunist, was still trying to hold on to some shred of dignity, but it was slipping through his fingers faster than he could grasp it. I could see the way his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the way his hand twitched at his side as if he was searching for a way to defend himself, to do something, anything to shift the tide in his favor. But it was too late. He had played his part in this twisted little game, and now, he was nothing more than a pawn caught in a trap of his own making. He could feel it, too. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. You really thought you could get away with this, didn't you? I asked, my voice low and steady, almost calm in contrast to the chaos I could feel bubbling under the surface. You thought you could live in a world of lies, pretend that everything was fine, and that I wouldn't see the truth. But I saw it. I saw every little thing you did, every lie you told, every stolen moment, every word you spoke behind my back. Serafina's face flushed, her lips trembling as she struggled to find the words to defend herself. But she couldn't. She knew she had no defense left. Her entire world was unraveling in front of her, and all she could do was stand there, powerless. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, her voice shaking. I just wanted to feel alive again. I was lost, Michael. The first thought I needed something else, something more. Something more? The words hit me like a slap to the face. I had been here. I had loved her. I had given her everything, trusted her with my heart, my soul. And this was her answer? That she needed more? That the life we built together wasn't enough for her? The betrayal stung deeper now, the wounds fresh again. But I couldn't let it show. I couldn't let her see how much it hurt. Not anymore. I had been broken once, but I wasn't going to let her break me again. Do you think that justifies what you did? I asked, the words slipping from my mouth like a blade. Do you think feeling alive was worth the destruction of everything we had? Worth breaking me? Worth tearing apart everything I trusted? My voice was rising now, my anger seeping through the cracks I had so carefully hidden. You thought you could just take everything without facing the consequences. But you were wrong. You were so wrong. Desmond finally spoke, his voice a desperate, shaky whisper. We didn't mean for it to hurt you this much, he said, but I could hear the weakness in his words, the lack of conviction. He knew what he had done. He knew that he had crossed a line, and now he was paying for it. They both were. Don't pretend like you didn't know exactly what you were doing, I said, cutting him off. You were a willing participant in all of this. You helped her destroy everything. You thought I wouldn't find out. Thought I wouldn't catch on. But I did. And now, I'm going to make sure you both understand what happens when you play with someone's life like it's a game. Desmond opened his mouth, but the words died on his lips. He had nothing left to say. There was no justification for what he had done. There was no way to explain away the destruction he had caused. He had been complicit in the lies, in the theft, in the affair that had shattered everything I had believed in. He could no longer hide behind his false bravado. He was exposed now, just like Serafina. Serafina, desperate to regain control, stepped toward me, her hand reaching out as if she could somehow stop the flood of truth that was sweeping over them both. "Please, Michael," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "I never wanted this to happen. I was just trying to fill a hole I didn't know how to fix. I thought this was what I needed." Her words were nothing more than a hollow plea, an attempt to justify her actions, to make herself the victim in this twisted scenario. But she wasn't the victim. She was the perpetrator, and I wasn't going to let her play that card anymore. "No," I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. "You weren't trying to fix anything. You were just trying to get away with it. You thought you could lie and cheat and still have everything: love, security, happiness, but you can't. You destroyed this, and now you're going to live with the consequences." The room was thick with silence now, the weight of my words settling over us like a suffocating blanket. They were both standing there, caught in the reality of what had just been revealed. There was no going back for them. No more lies, no more pretending. Everything was out in the open, and there was nowhere for them to run. "I don't want to hear any more excuses," I said, my voice firm, cutting through the tension like a hot knife. "This is the price you pay for what you did. You wanted to play a game, but now the stakes are real, and now you're going to lose." Serafina's face crumpled, her shoulders shaking as she finally let the tears fall. Desmond stood frozen beside her, his face a mask of frustration, fear, and guilt. They both knew it was over. They both knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I stepped back, taking a deep breath as the reality of the situation sank in. There was nothing more to say. No more words, no more justifications. The truth had been laid bare, and the fallout was just beginning. They had lost. They had lost everything, and now they would have to live with it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt peace. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they were all gone. And in their place was clarity, a clear path forward, free from the lies that had bound me for so long. "You've lost," I said one last time, my voice steady and final. "And now you'll face the consequences." The weight of the moment hit me like a freight train. The words I had spoken hung in the air like a dense fog, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. I had delivered my final blow, an emotional gut punch that left Serafina and Desmond reeling. But it wasn't about victory anymore. It wasn't about revenge, no matter how satisfying it had felt to expose them, to take back the control they had so callously stolen from me. No, this was about closure. This was about putting the final nail in the coffin of a life I had once believed was built on love and trust. And now, in this final moment, I was about to close the door on that chapter once and for all. Desmond was still standing there, stiff, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and disbelief. He couldn't believe what was happening, couldn't comprehend how everything had crumbled so quickly. But I wasn't surprised. It had always been inevitable. He thought he could use me, use Serafina, use everything around him as pawns in his little game of control. But now he was realizing, too late, that the game was over. The rules had changed, and he had lost. Serafina, on the other hand, was a broken woman. I had seen her tears before, seen her apologies, seen the fragile facade she had put up to convince me that she was the victim in this twisted tale. But this time, there was no more room for excuses. The act was over, the masks were gone, and the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was nothing more than a stranger standing in front of me now, someone who had destroyed everything in pursuit of her own hollow desires. I could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the regret, the realization that she had pushed too far, done too much, and now she was reaping the consequences of those actions. The woman I had trusted had shattered that trust beyond repair, and no amount of tears or pleading was going to change that. I looked at both of them, their faces pale, their bodies tense with uncertainty. They were both in shock, still reeling from the truth I had dropped like a bomb in the middle of their comfortable little world. But it wasn't enough for me to see them shaken. It wasn't enough for me to watch them squirm and realize what they had lost. No, I had to finish this. I had to ensure they understood the gravity of what had just happened. I couldn't just walk away from this. I couldn't let them slip through the cracks and move on with their lives. They needed to know what it felt like to lose everything, to feel that sharp sting of betrayal in the pit of their stomachs, to understand what it was like to watch everything slip away from you, just like they had done to me. I moved toward them, every step measured, deliberate. I didn't rush this. There was no need to. The power was mine, and I was going to make sure they knew it. Do you realize what you've done? I asked, my voice calm but firm. You've ruined everything, both of you. And now, there's no turning back. Desmond shifted uncomfortably, his gaze falling to the floor. He was the first to break under the weight of my words. What do you want from me, Michael? He muttered, his voice weak, barely above a whisper. What more do you want? You've got me. You've won. You've exposed everything. Just leave me be. The desperation in his voice was almost laughable. He thought that by pleading, by showing a little remorse, he could somehow escape the consequences of his actions. But it wasn't that simple. It would never be that easy. It's too late for that, Desmond, I said, my voice hard, my gaze unyielding. You don't get to walk away unscathed. You don't get to destroy my life, to tear apart everything I had, and then just beg for mercy. That's not how this works. Serafina flinched at my words, her eyes welling up with tears once again. She tried to take a step forward, but her body was trembling so much she could barely stand. Please, Michael, she cried, her voice breaking with the weight of her regret. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. It just spiraled out of control. I didn't know what to do. I stopped in front of her, just close enough to make her feel the weight of my presence, but not so close that I'd let her think for 1 second that I was going to take her hand again, that I was going to forgive her. You don't get to say that anymore, I said softly. But there was nothing gentle in my words. You don't get to play the victim, Serafina. You chose this. You chose him. And now you have to live with the consequences of that choice. She took a shaky breath, trying to find the words to make things right, but there was nothing left. There was no magic phrase that could undo the damage she had done. No apology that could heal the wounds she had inflicted. And for the first time, I felt something close to pity for her. She had destroyed everything. And now, standing here, she was left with nothing. The walls had fallen around her, and all she could do was stand there, watching the ruins of her own making. I never thought you'd find out, Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible. She was clutching at any shred of explanation, any last-ditch attempt to salvage what little was left of her dignity. I never thought it would go this far, but it did. And now I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, Michael. The first so sorry. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. Sorry, I repeated. You think saying sorry is going to fix this? Do you really think that's enough after everything you've done? After all the lies? After the betrayal? I shook my head. Sorry doesn't cut it, Serafina. Not anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of it settling on all of us, suffocating us. Desmond's face was flushed with shame, his mouth pressed tight as if he was trying to keep something back, probably a string of curses or an insult. But none of it mattered anymore. They were both at my mercy now, and I wasn't about to show any. They had taken everything from me, and I wasn't going to let them walk away without paying the price. I stepped back, my gaze still locked on them. This is over, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. And there's nothing either of you can do to change that. The truth is out now. It's done. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Serafina stood there, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her body still trembling as the reality of the situation began to settle in. Desmond was silent too, staring at the floor, his lips pressed into a thin line, his mind no doubt racing for a way out, for something he could say to make it all go away. But there was nothing. No last-minute apology, no clever excuse, no last-ditch effort to save face. It was over for them both. I'm done, I said finally, turning toward the door. This part of my life is over. And you're going to have to live with that. Forever. As I walked out of the room, leaving Serafina and Desmond behind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality wash over me. The weight that had been hanging over me for so long, the cloud of uncertainty, of pain, of betrayal was finally gone. I wasn't free from the scars they had left, but I was free from them. And that was enough. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. And I knew, deep down, that everything was going to be okay. And just when you think the dust has settled, bam! The final twist is here, and it'll make you rethink everything. Trust has been broken, secrets revealed, and now are the consequences truly over? Watch the shocking conclusion to find out. But before you go, do me a favor, drop a comment below on what you think would happen if you were in his place. The suspense is unbearable, but the payoff, absolutely worth it. The story teaches us that betrayal has a steep price. And the truth always comes to light no matter how deep the lies are buried. In a society built on trust and integrity, actions have consequences. And we must own up to them. Deception might seem like a shortcut, but it erodes relationships and damages our sense of self. In the end, facing the truth, no matter how painful, is the only way to heal and move forward. Let's remember that trust is earned, not taken, and integrity should never be compromised. Trust isn't just a word, it's the foundation of everything we do.